The black belt asked a quiet woman sitting by the wall to spar, just for fun. What happened next silenced the entire martial arts gym. Hey, you there watching, want to show your nephew how it's done? Victor Hale smirked from the center of the mat, his black belt gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Elena Martinez stood slowly, her plain gray clothes making her look like she didn't belong. The crowd chuckled. No one there knew she had walked away from a legendary career years ago. No one knew why she had sworn never to fight again, until that night. Before we dive in, if you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. She never wanted to be noticed. But that morning, every eye would eventually find her. It was a quiet Tuesday in the small-town gym of Ashbrook. The kind of place where the smell of sweat never truly left the air, where worn mats told stories of hundreds of sparring rounds. Against one wall, half hidden behind a rack of old gloves and headgear, sat Elena Marlowe, 27 years old, her dark hair tied back simply, no makeup, no jewelry. She wore a plain gray t-shirt tucked into navy training pants, nothing that spoke of pride or ambition. Just another young woman waiting in the background while others shouted, laughed, and sparred. Elena's eyes, though, never stopped moving. She watched the room carefully, how the light struck the steel beams above, how the heavy bags swayed unevenly after each strike, how younger students whispered nervously when a black belt crossed their path. She saw everything, but she said nothing. Beside her sat a small boy of about 9, her nephew Daniel. His face was pale, thin, still marked by the fragility of childhood sickness. He clutched a battered water bottle with peeling stickers, his legs swinging nervously as he tried to look braver than he felt. Daniel's eyes kept darting to the mat where senior students sparred, their crisp uniforms flashing as they moved. "Do you think I'll ever be that fast?" he whispered. His voice was thin, uncertain. Elena leaned slightly closer. Her hand rested gently on his shoulder. "Speed isn't everything, Daniel," she said softly. "See how they breathe? How they watch? That's where strength begins." Daniel nodded, though he didn't fully understand. He wanted to belong, to prove he wasn't as weak as doctors had called him since birth. Elena knew this. She felt his yearning as if it were her own. The gym roared around them, punches landing on pads, sneakers squeaking on the floor, laughter from the louder men in the corner. Yet Elena remained still, invisible. Some people glanced at her, dismissed her. To them, she was a quiet aunt keeping a child company. But Daniel leaned against her side, calmer now, steadying his breath. He didn't know that the calm he borrowed from her came from years of fire she had once endured. He only knew he felt safe near her. Across the room, a tall figure in a black belt tied with unnecessary flourish barked orders. His voice cut across the noise, demanding attention, carrying authority. Elena's gaze lingered on him only briefly. Then she returned to her nephew. For now, she was only an observer. But the room would soon know her. And as the black belt turned his head, his eyes seemed to search for something, or someone. The man in the black belt was Victor Hale, 32 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, his GI pressed so sharply it almost glistened under the overhead lights. His belt was knotted with the precision of a soldier, though his smile was not that of a teacher. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed being above others. Victor paced the mat like it was his personal stage. His voice rang clear, commanding. "Keep your guard up, or you'll spend the whole round eating strikes," he said to one of the young students, not unkindly at first. But then, when the boy fumbled again, his tone sharpened. "Pathetic. Even the bags fight back harder." Some of the older students chuckled under their breath. Others looked down, embarrassed for the boy. But no one spoke against Victor. They were used to him. He strode toward a teenage girl practicing kicks near the back. Her form was careful, but her kicks lacked force. Victor stopped, arms folded. "What are those? Half steps. If you kick like that in a real fight, you'll be carried home." His words weren't shouted, but they carried a sting sharper than any blow. The girl's cheeks burned red. She bowed her head quickly and muttered, "Yes, sir." Victor's eyes flicked across the room, making note of who laughed and who stayed silent. The laughter gave him fuel. Silence gave him power. Near the bleachers, two older men leaned close and whispered. "Same as always," one said, shaking his head. "He's got talent, but he doesn't know how to carry it with grace." The other shrugged. "People let him. Maybe that's the problem." Elena sat quietly, her hand still resting on Daniel's shoulder. She heard every word, but kept her face unreadable. Victor wasn't finished. He spotted a young man in the corner who had been watching instead of drilling. "Why are you standing there?" Victor barked. "If you can't keep up, go home. This isn't a daycare." The young man flushed, stammered something inaudible, and hurried to pick up his gloves. Victor's smirk widened. Another moment of dominance. Another reminder of who ruled the floor. Elena exhaled slowly through her nose. Daniel tensed against her side, unsure if he should look away or watch. Victor's gaze swept the room once more. This time, when his eyes brushed over Elena, he paused just slightly. Long enough to recognize she was there. Long enough to dismiss her again. The hum of the gym carried on, but something in that look told Elena the quiet would not last much longer. And Daniel, clutching her sleeve, whispered so only she could hear, "I don't like him." Elena's hand tightened around his. Victor's commands rolled on, sharp and constant. The students obeyed, though many wore tight jaws and downcast eyes. It wasn't teaching, it was ruling. Daniel shifted nervously on the bench, his small hands fidgeting with the cap of his water bottle. He tried to keep his eyes steady, but they kept darting toward Victor. Then it happened. Victor stopped in the middle of the floor. His gaze swept over the room, searching for a new target. When he spotted Daniel staring, he walked toward the bleachers, every step loud on the mat. "You there," Victor said, pointing directly at the boy. His voice carried, silencing the room. "Enjoying the show?" Daniel blinked, startled. His face went pale. I was just watching, sir." Victor smirked, towering over him. "Watching, hmm? You think you're learning by staring at your shoes?" A few chuckles rose from the back of the room. Victor tilted his head. "Or maybe you're just hiding behind your aunt." The words cut. Daniel's lips parted, but no answer came. His small shoulders curled inward. Elena's hand moved to steady him, but her eyes stayed fixed on Victor. Calm. Silent. Victor wasn't finished. He looked Daniel up and down, noting his thin arms, his pale cheeks. "If you're going to sit here, boy, at least look like you belong. Or don't come at all. We train fighters here, not ornaments." The laughter was louder this time. Nervous, but real. The girl who had been scolded earlier looked away, ashamed for Daniel. Daniel's eyes filled with tears he fought to hold back. His throat worked, but no sound came. The ridicule weighed on him heavier than any punch could. Elena's jaw tightened. Her fist curled once, then slowly uncurled. She shifted slightly, so her body shielded Daniel from the crowd's gaze. Her voice was low, meant only for him. "You sit tall," she whispered. "Don't let him bend you." Daniel sniffed, nodded, and straightened his back though his hands still trembled. Victor caught the movement and smirked again, satisfied with the sting he had delivered. He turned on his heel, walking back toward the center of the mat. To him, it was just another moment of putting someone in their place. But to Elena, it was different. This was not the first time she had seen cruelty dressed as strength, and it would not be the last. She brushed her thumb gently over Daniel's knuckles, steadying both him and herself. The silence between them carried more strength than words. In the center, Victor barked for the next drill. But Elena no longer watched with detachment. Something had shifted. The gym still bustled. Yet the air felt heavier now, and her stillness, once a shield, began to turn into something else. A decision was being born. The drills grew louder, harsher. Victor drove the class harder, his words sharp as whips. Sweat poured from the students, their movements frantic under his gaze. But it wasn't guidance. It was domination. Elena sat quietly, her eyes calm though her pulse quickened. Daniel leaned against her, still shaken. She stroked his hair once, then looked back to the floor with renewed focus. Victor called two younger men to the center. Both wore white belts, nervous energy radiating from them. They bowed stiffly before facing each other. "Show us around," Victor said, arms folded. "Let's see if you've learned anything." The two circled, hesitant, their movements awkward. A few in the crowd smiled politely, offering small encouragements. But Victor's mouth curled into disdain. "Stop," he snapped. He stepped forward and shoved one of the men backward with the heel of his palm. The man stumbled, nearly falling. "Is that how you stand? Like a child on ice?" The crowd chuckled again. The hum of complicity filled the air. Victor turned to the other. "And you, what was that swing? A slap? My grandmother hits harder." His voice dripped with mockery, the cruelty sharp enough to leave a mark deeper than any bruise. The two young men's faces burned red. Their eyes darted toward the onlookers. One shifted uneasily, muttering, "Sorry, sir." Victor stepped back, satisfied. "Do it again," he ordered. They did, but their movements only grew clumsier under the weight of humiliation. When one finally slipped and fell, the laughter rose louder. Elena's eyes narrowed. The sound grated against her memory, of soldiers jeering at recruits, of arrogant men testing dignity for sport. She exhaled slowly, her hands resting firm on her knees. Daniel whispered, "Why is he so mean?" His voice was thin, almost breaking. Elena's reply was quiet, steady. "Because no one stops him." Victor dismissed the pair with a wave of his hand, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "Pathetic," he declared. "If you can't stand proud here, you'll crawl everywhere else." The young men bowed, humiliated, and slunk back to the edges of the mat. Their friends offered weak smiles, pats on the back, but the wound was clear. The room shifted subtly. Some students laughed still, but others lowered their heads. Whispers stirred near the back, uneasy. And from her place on the bench, Elena knew this was no longer just his habit, it was his pattern. He didn't teach. He belittled. He didn't lead. He fed on fear. The decision stirring in her chest pressed harder now, like a weight she could no longer set down. Victor scanned the room again, searching for his next mark. His eyes lingered, then slowly turned back toward the bleachers. Toward Elena. The gym's air thickened. Students stood straighter, sensing a shift. Victor's eyes locked on Elena where she sat with Daniel, quiet, watchful, her presence so still it seemed out of place among the restless crowd. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate. The chatter dimmed with each step he took. When he stopped before her, his smirk widened. "You've been sitting there all morning," he said, his voice carrying so all could hear. "Watching, judging, not even moving. Tell me, are you here to learn, or just to babysit?" The crowd chuckled, uneasy but eager for spectacle. Daniel shrank closer to Elena, clutching her sleeve. She placed her hand over his without looking at him. Her gaze stayed steady on Victor. Victor tilted his head, as if weighing his next words. Then, loud enough for the back wall to hear, he declared, "Why don't you show us something? A little spar, just for fun." Gasps and whispers spread through the gym. A few students grinned, sensing entertainment. Others frowned, uncomfortable. Victor gestured toward the center mat with a sweeping hand. "Come on. We'll make it simple. A demonstration. For the amateurs." The phrase stung. Its mockery aimed not just at Elena, but at anyone who had ever sat quietly at the margins. Daniel's grip on her sleeve tightened. "Auntie, you don't have to," he whispered. His voice shook with fear, not for himself this time, but for her. Elena laid her hand gently on his cheek, guiding his eyes to hers. "It's all right," she said softly. "Sometimes silence is misunderstood." She rose slowly, her movements unhurried. The bench creaked beneath her as if reluctant to release her. The gym hushed, the shuffle of her feet against the floor the only sound. Victor stepped back, gesturing to the mat as though presenting a stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's see if our quiet guest has anything to offer." His tone dripped with confidence, with mock courtesy. The crowd parted to give her space. Some whispered bets. Others folded their arms, waiting to see her embarrassed and dismissed. Elena walked with calm grace to the center. No theatrics, no flourish. Her plain t-shirt hung loose, her bare feet silent against the mat. She stopped, bowed her head once, simple, respectful. Victor grinned at the gesture, mistaking it for meekness. The air quivered with anticipation. Students leaned forward. Phones quietly lifted to record. The show, they thought, was about to begin. But Elena's stillness said otherwise. The gym buzzed with suppressed laughter. Some students whispered predictions. She'll back out. He'll crush her in seconds. Others watched in pity, already preparing themselves for discomfort. Victor stood tall in the center, hands on his hips. "So," he said, his tone carrying mock gentleness. "Do you accept, or would you rather take Daniel home early?" A few chuckles rippled. Daniel looked down, cheeks burning. Elena lifted her eyes. Calm, steady, no flinch, no retreat. "I accept," she said simply. The words landed like a stone dropped in water. The ripples spread across the crowd, stilling the laughter. Victor blinked, surprised by the clarity of her voice. He had expected hesitation, a nervous laugh, maybe even an excuse. Instead, her reply cut through the room with quiet certainty. Daniel's mouth opened. "But—" Elena touched his shoulder gently. "It's all right." Her gaze returned to Victor. She bowed once more, a slight bend at the waist, dignified but unyielding. Victor smirked, though it faltered just slightly. "Good, good. Then let's make this interesting." He raised his voice so all could hear. "A little warm-up round. Nothing serious. Just for fun." The crowd stirred again. Phones lifted higher now. Someone muttered, "This'll be quick." Another whispered, "She doesn't stand a chance." Elena stepped into the center, her bare feet aligning with precision, though most did not notice. She lifted her chin, her expression calm but unreadable. No bravado, no nervous smile. Victor circled her once, measuring, waiting for a reaction. Elena's eyes followed, unwavering, but her body stayed rooted, her breathing slow and controlled. Daniel's fingers dug into the bench. He wanted to shout for her to stop, to sit down, but something about her posture, so calm, so certain, froze the words in his throat. Victor stopped circling. He gave a theatrical bow, exaggerated, mocking. "Let's see what the quiet lady has," he said, grinning at the crowd. Elena bowed back, but hers was small, efficient, respectful. The room was silent now, every ear waiting, every breath held. Victor's grin widened, feeding off the attention, but Elena's gaze never shifted. Calm as water, clear as glass. For the first time, some in the crowd felt the balance tilt, slightly, imperceptibly, away from Victor's control. And in that silence, her acceptance echoed louder than his challenge. Victor straightened, rolling his shoulders with deliberate show. His black belt swayed with each motion, a badge of status he wielded like a crown. The students hooped softly, eager for entertainment, for proof of their teacher's superiority. Elena stood still, her plain gray shirt catching none of the light, her posture neither aggressive nor timid. She breathed once, deep and slow, as though steadying the entire room with her rhythm. When she finally spoke, her voice carried clearly across the mats, surprising in its strength. "I'll spar with you," she said. Then, after a pause, "but on one condition." A murmur swept through the crowd. Conditions were not expected. Victor arched a brow, half amused, half irritated. "A condition," he repeated, his voice dripping with theatrical disbelief. "We don't usually bargain in training matches." Elena didn't move. "If I lose, I'll leave this gym and won't return." She allowed the words to hang in the air long enough to seem final. "But if you lose, you will stand before everyone here and apologize. Not just to me. To every student you've mocked, belittled, and dismissed." The gym went silent. Truly silent this time, with no nervous chuckles, no shuffling feet. Even Daniel's breath caught. Victor laughed once, sharp and dismissive, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "An apology? That's what you want." He shook his head, pretending amusement, though the demand had pierced deeper than he expected. "Yes," Elena said. Her tone never wavered. "Respect. Nothing more." The words struck like a bell, reverberating through those who had been targets of Victor's cruelty. The young man shoved earlier, the teenage girl scolded, the white belts humiliated. Each felt a spark stir inside. Victor's smirk faltered. He looked around, noting the shifting expressions in the crowd. Some of his loyal supporters still grinned, expecting his easy victory. But others now wore thoughtful looks, even quiet hope. His stage had shifted. What was meant as mockery now carried stakes beyond his control. He clapped his hands once, loudly, breaking the stillness. "Fine," he said, forcing lightness into his voice. "If that's what it takes. But I hope you don't regret your little challenge." The crowd exhaled, releasing the breath they had been holding. The terms were set. What began as a spectacle now felt like something more, something heavier. Daniel's wide eyes followed Elena as she stepped back into position. He wanted to call out, to beg her to stop, but her calm expression silenced him. She had spoken, and her words had given the room something it hadn't known it was missing. A chance at dignity. Victor settled into his stance. The spar would begin soon. But the room already knew. It was no longer just for fun. That evening, the gym emptied slowly. Laughter returned in cautious bursts, but it carried an edge, like people unsure whether they were safe to enjoy it. Elena gathered Daniel's bag, walked him home through the cool night air, and left him with his grandmother. She said little, only that she had agreed to something tomorrow. Daniel wanted to ask more, but her eyes told him not tonight. Later, in her small apartment above the corner store, Elena sat alone at her kitchen table. The single bulb overhead hummed faintly, throwing shadows against the walls. On the table before her lay a small wooden box, scarred from years of handling. Her hand hovered above it for a long moment before she slid the lid open. Inside, neatly folded, rested a strip of faded cloth. It was once part of a uniform, the white long since dulled into gray. Alongside it lay a tarnished medal, its ribbon frayed. Elena touched the edge of the medal with her fingertip, not lifting it, only tracing its outline. Her breath caught, memory rushing forward. A voice, deep and steady, echoed in her ears. "Never strike to prove yourself. Strike only to protect." It was her father's voice, Major Samuel Marlowe, a soldier and martial artist whose name still carried weight among those who remembered. He had trained her since childhood, not for trophies, but for discipline, for balance. He had died when she was only 17, leaving behind a silence that had never been filled. Elena leaned back, eyes closed. She saw again the long mornings on dew-wet grass, her father correcting her stance with a gentle hand on her shoulder. She heard his laughter when she moved too quickly, his quiet nod when she finally slowed enough to listen. And then, she remembered the day of his funeral. The folded flag, the heavy silence, the men in uniform who spoke of honor but looked at her like a child too small for the legacy she had inherited. Victor's mocking voice echoed now in that silence. "Or maybe you're just hiding behind your aunt." Elena's hand closed around the medal, firm. She opened her eyes. The room was still the same. The old kettle, the chipped counter, the quiet hum of the light. But within her, something had shifted. She set the medal back in the box, folded the cloth once more, and closed the lid. She pressed her palm against it, steady, as if sealing away the pain but carrying forward the strength. Tomorrow was not about victory. It was about truth, and she would not let Daniel, or anyone, believe cruelty was strength. The box remained on the table. Her eyes softened, but her jaw no longer trembled. Resolve had replaced sorrow. Morning light seeped through Elena's curtains, pale and thin. She rose early, her body following habits long ingrained, though she had not trained openly in years. The floor creaked under her bare feet as she moved into the center of the small room. There, with no one watching, she began. Slow at first. A breath, a step. Her arms rose, turned, cut through the air with precision. Then quicker. Patterns emerged, fluid, balanced, disciplined. Not the movements of someone dabbling. These were the marks of mastery. Her mind drifted back to the years when those movements were not secrets but demonstrations. She remembered the weight of the GI jacket heavy with sweat, the harsh light of competitions, the crowd's murmur as her name was whispered. Silent Storm. That was the name they had given her. A fighter who never boasted, who spoke little, who let her movements answer all questions. By 20, she had earned 3 national titles. Her reputation built not on brute force, but on a style so precise it appeared effortless. Opponents swung with fury. She stepped aside with grace, redirected, ended matches before they truly began. But behind the medals, a shadow lingered. Her father's death, the pressure of legacy, the constant need to prove herself in rooms where men dismissed her as too young, too small, too fragile. And then came the injury, the torn ligament during a final match. She had won that bout, but it ended her career. She retired quietly, withdrawing from the public eye, refusing interviews, fading into silence. Most forgot her. Others assumed she had abandoned the path. Few remembered that she had chosen quiet not from weakness, but from grief. Now, standing alone in her apartment, Elena completed the final movement of the kata. Her foot landed with a soft but steady thud against the wooden floor. She held the position, breathing deeply. The memory of applause faded. The echo of her father's voice returned. Skill is not for show. It is for the moment when silence is no longer enough. Elena opened her eyes. Her reflection in the small mirror above the sink met her gaze. Not the teenager once crowned Silent Storm. Not the grieving daughter hiding behind walls of quiet. But someone older, steadier, ready. She reached for her bag. Folded within it was not a GI, but the same plain clothing she wore yesterday. She did not need costume or title to prove anything. But when she stepped onto the mat again, the storm would no longer remain silent. That night, after Daniel had gone to sleep in the room next door, Elena sat once more at her kitchen table. The wooden box lay before her, its lid closed, the metal hidden inside. She had promised herself years ago she would not open old wounds. Yet here she was, carrying them into tomorrow. The hum of the street outside was faint, distant cars, a dog barking, a neighbor's muffled radio. But within her apartment, all was still. She stared at the box, not with sorrow now, but with a quiet clarity that came from knowing what was at stake. Elena reached into her pocket and drew out something she rarely touched, a folded scrap of paper, its edges frayed from years of keeping. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was her father's handwriting, his words penned in the steady block letters he used when instructing recruits. Strength without humility is weakness disguised. Never forget why you fight. Her hand trembled slightly as she traced the letters. She remembered the day he had given it to her, after her first tournament victory at 15. She had wanted to shout her triumph to the world, but he had placed the note in her palm instead, closing her fingers around it with a gentle firmness. This will outlast medals, he had said. She closed her eyes now, and in that silence she spoke aloud, not to herself, but to him. Father, tomorrow I stand again. Not for glory, not for pride, for Daniel, for those who can't speak, for those who are silenced. Her voice wavered once, then steadied. I will not let cruelty stand as strength. I will not let arrogance silence respect. That is my promise, to you and to him. Her eyes opened, sharper than before. The sorrow that had lingered since his death had always dimmed her resolve. But tonight, speaking the words, the weight shifted. It was no longer sorrow that bound her. It was duty. She refolded the note with care, slid it back into her pocket, and placed her hand once more on the wooden box. I carry you with me, she whispered, her voice softer now, as though afraid to wake Daniel. Then she pushed the box away, no longer needing to linger. She rose, filled her kettle, and set it on the stove. The mundane act, so ordinary, felt purposeful now. Tomorrow was not about proving her past. It was about honoring it. As the kettle began to whistle, Elena stood straighter. Her vow had been spoken. The storm had chosen its path. The next evening, the gym of Ashbrook filled long before class began. Word had spread quickly. Some came out of loyalty to Victor. Others came because curiosity gnawed at them. And a quiet few came hoping the story might turn against the usual current. The air was electric, charged with chatter. Students warmed up noisily, punching pads with extra sharpness, laughing louder than usual. Parents and friends filled the benches, their eyes drawn again and again to the center mat where the spar would take place. Victor stood near the front, his GI crisp, his black belt tied with deliberate precision. He greeted supporters with firm handshakes, his confidence on display. It's nothing, he said loudly enough for half the room to hear. Just a demonstration. We'll make it fun. The crowd chuckled, reassured. To them, this was a foregone conclusion. Then the door opened quietly. Elena stepped inside. She wore the same simple gray shirt and navy pants. No GI, no belt. Her dark hair tied back loosely. Nothing adorned her except the calm that seemed to trail her like a shadow. Daniel followed close, holding her bag though it was nearly empty. His steps were hesitant, but his chin was higher than yesterday. The room shifted. Some smirked at her plain clothes. Others exchanged curious glances. A few, remembering the condition she had set, leaned forward with sharper attention. Elena walked with steady pace, her eyes not on Victor, not on the crowd, but straight ahead. She reached the bench, placed her bag down gently, and touched Daniel's shoulder. "Stay here," she said softly. He nodded, gripping the bench's edge. Victor clapped his hands, commanding silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared with mock grandeur, "our guest has returned to honor her word. Let's see what she's brought us tonight." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, though not as strong as before. Something about her composure unsettled the certainty of their amusement. Elena stepped onto the mat, bowing once, small and precise. She moved to her place opposite Victor, her feet aligning with a quiet discipline that only a trained eye could notice. The benches creaked as the crowd leaned forward. Phones were lifted, screens glowing. Daniel gripped the fabric of his pants, his knuckles white. Victor smirked, raising his hands in a ready stance, wide and theatrical. Elena simply lifted her chin, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing slow and measured. Two figures faced each other now, one draped in pride, the other cloaked in stillness. The gym, once buzzing with chatter, fell into an expectant hush. And in that hush, the balance of power began, quietly, to tilt. The moment Victor raised his stance, the crowd erupted in applause and whistles. He basked in it, grinning wide, feeding off the noise as though it were fuel. His arms cut the air with sharp, flashy motions, spins, sudden shifts of weight, loud stomps that made the mat shudder. Every movement was meant for show. "Watch closely," he called out, his tone part challenge, part performance. "This is how precision looks." He lunged forward, striking at Elena with a flurry of rapid kicks and punches. The crowd gasped, phones held higher, eager to capture the spectacle. But Elena didn't strike back. She moved only when she needed to, her steps slight, her turns barely noticeable. A shoulder shifted just enough to let a fist pass by. A foot slid an inch, and a kick sliced through empty space. Her calm made the storm of Victor's attacks appear clumsy, though to most, it happened too subtly to see at first. Victor's punches grew faster. His kicks snapped sharper, loud against the air. Yet still, she was never where he aimed. Always just beyond reach. The crowd laughed nervously at first, thinking she was lucky. Then their chuckles faltered. Again and again, his strikes missed. She hadn't touched him, hadn't raised a hand, yet she was untouched. Victor scowled briefly, then forced a grin to hide it. "Not bad," he said loudly, circling her. "Quick feet. But this isn't a dance." He launched another sequence, faster, stronger. Elena tilted her head slightly, eyes calm, feet light. His strike missed again, glancing past where she had been a breath before. Another followed, met with the same absence. She moved like water flowing around stone, quiet, natural, unstoppable. The whispers began. Students leaned toward one another. "She hasn't even hit him. Did you see that step? It wasn't luck. She's not afraid." Victor heard the murmurs. His grin tightened. He threw a particularly flashy spinning kick, his GI snapping with the motion. Elena stepped aside as if avoiding a falling leaf, her face serene. The crowd fell silent. Phones lowered slightly as confusion replaced amusement. Mini payoff. For the first time, the room questioned the certainty of Victor's dominance. His theatrics, once impressive, now seemed desperate beside Elena's calm. The spectators leaned in, no longer waiting for her to be embarrassed. They were waiting for something else, something they couldn't yet name. Victor's breath came faster now. He circled her again, no longer quite so confident. And Elena, hands still loose at her sides, finally lifted her eyes to meet his. Victor's grin faltered as he circled, sweat glistening along his brow. His earlier showmanship had carried the crowd, but now, the weight of their silence pressed against him. Every missed strike lingered in the air. Every step Elena took, small, precise, unhurried, made his confidence bleed away. He struck again. A straight punch, quick and clean. Elena moved only her shoulder, and the blow cut nothing but air. He pivoted, swept low, but she stepped back an inch and his leg brushed past her trousers. Again, again, each failure sharper than the last. The murmurs swelled. She hasn't even raised her hands. He can't touch her. The onlookers who once laughed now exchanged uneasy looks. A few lowered their eyes, ashamed they had joined in mocking her at the start. Victor's strikes grew heavier, the thud of his heels slamming against the mat. He abandoned elegance. No flourishes, no performance. Each movement was now raw, stripped of polish. He was no longer trying to impress. He was trying to land a single touch. But Elena moved as though she had always known his choices. A shift of weight here, a glance there. Her steps were neither hurried nor hesitant. They were simply right. Victor's jaw clenched. "Stand still," he barked, voice cutting through the hush of the crowd. His frustration betrayed him. His once graceful rhythm was gone, broken by rage and disbelief. Elena's lips pressed into a faint, unreadable line. She didn't answer. She didn't taunt. She simply watched him, eyes steady, breathing even. A sharp gasp rose from the audience as Victor lunged with both fists, his full weight behind him. Elena turned her body at the last instant, guiding his momentum past her with the lightest brush of her sleeve. He stumbled forward, forced to catch himself with a heavy step. The silence deepened. The shift was complete. No longer was the crowd watching a test of Victor's power. They were witnessing its unraveling. For the first time, doubt flickered in Victor's eyes. He stared at her, chest rising and falling, anger fighting with fear. He had always been untouchable in this space, always the one admired. Yet now, before the woman they had overlooked, cracks were spreading through his image. And Elena, still composed, finally spoke, her voice calm, almost soft. "You strike so loudly, but none of it reaches." The words struck harder than any blow. The crowd stirred, whispers rising like wind. Victor's face darkened, his composure slipping further. Victor's chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven bursts. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his knuckles raw from striking only emptiness. His stare drilled into Elena, searching for weakness. He found none. She stood straight, shoulders relaxed, hands lowered. Her expression never shifted, serene, unyielding. To the crowd, she looked almost fragile. To Victor, she looked immovable. "Fight me properly," he snapped, voice cracking at the edges. His command rang out, but it sounded less like authority and more like desperation. Elena tilted her head ever so slightly, eyes still fixed on him. When she spoke, her words cut with the calm precision of a blade. "I'm waiting for the professional demonstration to begin." The silence that followed was total. It lingered long enough for the sting to sink in, not just for Victor, but for every person who had once chuckled at her quiet form in plain white trousers and her faded training shirt. A ripple spread across the crowd. Some gasped softly. Others lowered their gaze, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes, ashamed for siding with mockery earlier. The words weren't shouted. They weren't cruel. They were worse. They were true. Victor's fists clenched. The muscles in his arms trembled, whether from fatigue or rage was unclear. His face flushed red, veins tightening at his temples. He opened his mouth, but no retort came. The gym had already heard Elena's quiet defiance, and nothing he could say would erase it. His lips pressed into a thin line. He raised his fists again, now with less flair, less showmanship. He attacked, sharp and brutal. The crowd flinched at every swing, but Elena slipped past each strike with effortless grace. The harder he pushed, the calmer she seemed. Whispers broke through again. "She's controlling the pace. He's chasing her. He can't land anything." For the first time, Victor heard them, and it crushed him. His breaths came rougher, harsher. His strikes, once smooth, now chopped through the air with ragged force. Every failure eroded him further. Every dodge tightened the knot in his chest. Elena's gaze never left him. Her silence weighed more heavily than any blow could. Victor growled through his teeth, slamming forward once more. "You think you're better than me?" She did not answer. She did not need to. The calm taunt already echoed in every corner of the room. Victor exploded forward, his body a storm of unchecked fury. Gone were the polished stances and clean lines that once drew admiration from the students. His strikes now came fast but reckless, smashing through the air like hammers with no aim beyond impact. The mat shook under his boots as he lunged, pivoted, and swung again. Elena didn't move more than necessary. A shift of her shoulder, a turn of her wrist, a single step back. Her movements were almost invisible, so small and efficient that they felt insulting to Victor's full-force assaults. The crowd gasped when his fist sliced past her cheek by no more than an inch. His foot stomped the mat, missing her shin. His elbow tore through the empty air where her ribs should have been. Each miss left him more exposed, more desperate. Victor's teeth bared. His breath turned ragged. His strikes came faster, as though speed alone might break her calm. But the harder he attacked, the more foolish he looked. His power only betrayed him. His effort only displayed her mastery. The whispers in the crowd no longer carried disbelief. They carried awe. She hasn't even touched him. She's reading him like a book. He can't keep this up. Elena's eyes never left him. Her stillness was its own weapon. It reflected every failure back at him like a mirror, showing him the truth he fought hardest to deny. He was losing, not to brute force, but to patience, to discipline, to control. A younger student at the front covered her mouth with her hands, eyes wide. An older man, once nodding proudly at Victor, now shook his head. Even those who had mocked Elena earlier now leaned forward in their seats, spellbound by the quiet storm unfolding before them. Victor swung again, a heavy downward strike meant to crush. Elena stepped aside, letting his momentum drive him nearly to his knees. He stumbled, caught himself, and roared in anger. "Stand and fight," he barked, spittle on his lips. Elena remained silent. Her chest rose and fell evenly, her hands relaxed. She could have spoken, but words were unnecessary. His rage was already tearing him apart, leaving only openings in its wake. The storm inside Victor raged, but the room knew storms burn themselves out. Victor's chest heaved as though the air itself resisted him. Sweat dripped from his brow, darkening the collar of his black GI. His hands, once precise weapons, now shook with fury and exhaustion. The storm he had summoned was devouring him. The room felt hushed despite the flurry of motion. Students pressed forward on the benches, their breath shallow, their eyes wide. Even the usual shuffling of feet had ceased, replaced by a reverent silence. Elena stood at the center of it all, unmoved, her presence steady as stone. Victor bellowed, his pride giving him one final surge. He lunged, every muscle straining, every ounce of strength poured into the strike he had perfected over years of practice. His signature move, his pride, the devastating overhand strike that had humbled countless challengers before. His foot slammed against the mat with thunderous force as he drove downward. Elena's eyes softened. Her body shifted, quiet as falling rain. With a simple step to the side, her left hand rose, not to block, not to clash, but to guide. She touched his wrist with the gentleness of one setting aside a curtain. With that single redirection, his weight betrayed him. Victor's body pitched forward, momentum unchecked. His balance vanished in an instant. Elena's other hand brushed against his shoulder, guiding the arc of his collapse. To the crowd, it looked almost graceful, as though he were bowing before her without meaning to. But the sound of his body slamming into the mat echoed sharp and final. The silence that followed was immense. Victor groaned, the breath knocked from him, staring up at the ceiling in disbelief. He had not been struck down. He had not been battered into defeat. He had been undone by his own force, his own arrogance turned against him with emotion so slight it was nearly invisible. Elena remained standing, her feet planted with quiet dignity. She did not raise her arms in triumph. She did not smirk or gloat. She simply stood in stillness, as though she had done nothing more than set aside a falling branch. The crowd's murmur rose slowly, then fell again. People were not sure if they had truly seen what had happened. Some replayed the moment in their minds, trying to catch the detail they had missed. Others stared at Elena, searching for a clue, a break in her composure, something to explain the miracle they had just witnessed. Victor rolled onto his side, shame pulling at every feature of his face. His pride, so towering only moments before, lay shattered beside him, and the gym remained silent, waiting for what would come next. A hush held the room as Victor lay sprawled on the mat, his pride broken more deeply than his body. His students stared in disbelief, their confidence in their master dissolving into silence. Elena stood still, her hands resting loosely at her sides. She had not spoken, had not claimed her victory. She let the quiet tell the story. Then, cutting through the silence, came a trembling voice from the benches. It was Sophia, her niece, her small hands clutching the railing, her eyes wide with tears. That's her, that's Silent Storm. Heads turned sharply. Whispers spread like fire on dry grass. Silent Storm. The name carried weight. A legend spoken in martial arts circles years ago, though always with doubt. Some said the fighter was a myth, a shadow that moved through tournaments and vanished as quickly as she came. Others swore she had defeated champions 3 times her size, then disappeared without explanation. Phones lit up across the gym. Fingers tapped feverishly. Images appeared, grainy tournament footage, a younger woman moving with the same eerie precision, her face hidden by a mask in every match. Headlines resurfaced. Silent Storm strikes again. Undefeated phantom leaves arena behind. The students gasped as recognition bloomed. The way she moved, the impossible stillness, the simplicity of her takedown. There was no mistaking it. Elena Alvarez, standing quietly in their small-town dojo, was no ordinary woman. She was the legend whispered about in martial arts halls for nearly a decade. Victor, still kneeling on the mat, turned toward her. His lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted between her calm figure and the glowing screens that confirmed what his heart already knew. His arrogance collapsed under the truth. The opponent he had mocked, the woman he had tried to humiliate, had carried a history greater than his own. Gasps gave way to awe. Students who once smirked at Elena's plain attire now bowed their heads. Parents pulled their children closer, whispering lessons about respect they wished they had spoken earlier. Even those who had come to see her fail now found themselves leaning forward, hungry to witness something greater than spectacle. Elena lifted her gaze, not to boast, not to demand reverence, but simply to acknowledge the moment. She reached into her bag at the edge of the mat and drew out a small, worn cloth, her father's black belt, the one she had carried with her since his passing. She tied it gently around her waist, a silent confirmation of who she was. The crowd did not cheer. They did not clap. They stood in reverent silence, united by the weight of what they had seen. Victor lowered his head. The legend had stepped out of shadow, and the truth could not be ignored. Elena stood with her father's belt around her waist, her posture straight, her face calm. She was not there to gloat. She was not there to humiliate. She was there because truth had demanded it. Victor pushed himself slowly to his feet, his movements stiff, as if every joint carried the weight of shame. His breathing was heavy, though not from the spar itself. It was the weight of defeat, of exposure, of realizing that arrogance had left him blind. He looked at Elena, then at the students who once admired him. Their faces had changed. They were no longer certain. Some looked disappointed, others ashamed, many in awe of the woman he had mocked. Elena's voice broke the silence. Soft, even, but unshakable. Strength is not measured by how many you can beat down. It is measured by how many you lift up. Her words carried through the room. They were not grand or poetic. They were simple. They were true. Her gaze swept the crowd, not with judgment, but with a quiet invitation. Respect is not given because of belts or titles. It is given because of how you treat others when no one is watching. A murmur moved through the audience, heads nodding, shoulders sinking. The message struck deeper than any strike could. Victor's lips trembled as he tried to speak. Twice he stopped, his voice failing him. Finally, he straightened his back, his pride forcing him to look her in the eye. I was wrong. The words sounded strange in his mouth, foreign, but they carried truth. He turned to his students, his face pale. I was wrong to mock her. To mock any of you. My arrogance blinded me. He swallowed, his jaw tightening. Elena Alvarez. Silent storm. I owe you, and all of them, an apology. His voice broke. I let pride become my teacher, and it led me here. The students who had once laughed at Elena's plain clothes now bowed their heads toward her, not in submission, but in respect. Parents pressed hands to their children's shoulders, urging them to remember what they were witnessing. Elena did not smile. She simply inclined her head, her calm presence filling the room. An apology is the first step. The harder part is how you live after. Victor nodded once. It was not the end of his lesson, it was the beginning. The gym remained hushed, waiting for what would come next. A young boy in a white belt, Mateo, no older than 10, stepped forward. He looked up at Elena, eyes wide, voice trembling. Thank you for standing up. For all of us. His mother came after him, placing a hand on his shoulder. She gave Elena a grateful nod, her lips pressed together as if words could not carry the weight she felt. Others followed. A teenager in a green belt, one who had once been laughed at for his stumbles during drills, came closer. He bowed low, his voice steady. I thought it was me. I thought I was weak. But it wasn't weakness, it was how I was treated. You showed us what respect looks like. Elena inclined her head to each of them, not claiming their gratitude, but receiving it quietly, like one might receive water in dry hands. Her stillness gave them space to speak what they had long kept inside. A small cluster of parents began clapping, hesitant at first, then steady, their sound filling the room. Others joined. The rhythm was not wild or celebratory. It was measured, reverent, a sign of collective acknowledgement. Victor remained apart, silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. His students now moved toward Elena instead of him. Yet no one mocked him. No one jeered. That was her influence. Humility softened even the hardest edges. In the back of the room, a man in a faded jacket stood, leaning on a cane. His voice was low but strong enough to carry. I knew her father, he said. He taught us in the service. He said discipline is love. And today, I saw his words alive in her. The crowd turned, murmurs passing through them like ripples across water. That name, Alvarez, echoed differently now. It was no longer the name of a quiet woman standing in plain clothes. It was a legacy, a bridge from the past to the present. Elena bowed her head once, her eyes glistening just slightly before she steadied herself again. I am only a student, she said softly. As he was. As we all are. None of us is finished learning. The atmosphere shifted fully. No longer divided, no longer tense. The gym felt lighter, the weight of arrogance replaced by something firmer, cleaner, mutual respect. And in that silence, the seed of change took root. Morning light streamed across the polished floorboards of the same gym that had once held its breath in disbelief. Weeks had passed since that night, but the air no longer carried tension. Instead, it hummed with a quiet harmony. The mats were filled with students of all ages, white belts practicing side by side with advanced ranks, their laughter and concentration weaving together like threads in one cloth. At the far corner, Elena stood in her plain training uniform. No stripes, no patches, just the simplest of GIs. She watched the class with steady eyes, her hands loosely folded in front of her. People noticed her presence, yet she did not stand at the center. She had chosen the edges, where she could see everything without demanding attention. Victor, once proud and untouchable, now moved among the students with a different air. His steps were slower, his words more careful. He corrected a beginner's stance, but his tone carried patience instead of scorn. When he caught Elena watching, he paused, then bowed his head slightly. It was not a grand gesture, but it was sincere. The community around the gym had shifted, too. Parents lingered longer after classes, speaking kindly with one another, no longer divided into those favored and those dismissed. Students who had once shrunk into themselves now asked questions freely, trusting they would be heard. The ripples of one night's lesson had spread outward, touching even those who had not been there to see it. Later, after the last class ended, Elena sat with Sophia on a bench just outside. The girl clutched a worn notebook filled with her own training sketches. She leaned against her aunt's arm, her voice small. "Everyone knows now," she said. "They whisper when you walk past. They call you Silent Storm." Elena smiled faintly, her gaze on the fading sky. "It was only a name, a time that passed. But they respect you," Sophia insisted. "They see you now." Elena turned to her, her voice low and even. "Respect is not for being seen. It is for how we carry ourselves when no one is watching. That is what your grandfather taught me. That is what I hope you'll remember." Sophia rested her head on her aunt's shoulder, comforted by the steadiness in her words. The sun slipped lower, leaving a warm glow across the quiet street. In that gentle light, Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She had reclaimed her dignity, not by force, not by fame, but by living the truth she had always known. True strength had never been about domination. It was, and always would be, about kindness, humility, and integrity. And with that, the day closed, not with noise, but with peace. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.